Hi everyone, I'm Dean Smith, and I was doing this video here today to talk about these new shelves that I had installed on my wall here for my Lego kits. I wanted some floating shelves that were glass so you could see through, and you didn't feel like you necessarily blocked your view of all the other kits that were above and below a shelf. I kind of like the idea of the glass, gives it a little bit more of an open feel. And so I started recording some of this stuff in the middle, and I just want to talk a little bit about how I got to what I am doing here. And it really comes back to I wanted something that allowed the shelves to be uh, feel more open, but still be able to house a lot of different kits and really be able to see them all. And even though like some of this stuff is kind of tight down in here, I can see through the shelf, so I can see the kits. If that was a solid shelf, I wouldn't be able to see the, the sets that are underneath there. So I have that here, and I kind of wrapped it around uh, the corner here. And I actually have two shelves in there, but I'm only using one right now. I may change that because I may rearrange all of this again. But for now, this is how I have it set up. I wanted to get everything moved into it to get a look at it. And it went through quite a few iterations. I mean, there was always the concept of wanting a floating shelf there that I could stick glass pieces into that were tightly packed, but that I could put glass in wherever I wanted, so that when I have one kit that takes up the height of 3 shelves, or a kit that takes up the height of 2, or kits that take up only the height of 1 shelf, I can mix and match that glass, and I can have it come in and go back and forth and really fit things together ideally. So have all that set up, and where some of the video that I shot starts is where I've actually already assembled some of the blades. So just to tell you, I had gone through some prototypes and messing around with it, and so I'll pull up some pictures of that now. So these this prototype that I did here, I just kind of cut a 2x4 off to start with, and got the angle on it, and I actually used the other half of what I cut off to do the bracer piece on top to hold the glass from tipping off the edge. At the end of the day, I ended up actually just splitting the 2x4s and using each half of it as a blade, and then getting a separate board to come in and cut across the top of that and support the glass from the top. But the basic concept was there, and then eventually, as I posted some stuff about what I was working on a Lego group on LinkedIn, and they actually suggested doing LED accent lighting, which is ultimately what you have here. And that was a really great suggestion, because I was originally looking at doing the LEDs as a light source to illuminate the kits, whereas now it's just accent lighting to make it look a little cooler. And so I'll worry about how I'm going to illuminate the entire corner later with something other than a floor lamp. But these are some of the initial prototypes where I didn't have that in, and then later on I'll do a video where a short clip where I show a test run with a groove cut out to do the LEDs. All right, well, with that, there are a lot of clips here of things that I've done along the way, and just explanations of what I was doing as I was going along. Like I said, I did kind of jump into the middle of it, but without further ado, let's get into some of those clips and how the project moved along. Okay, so I thought I'd gotten a lot of work done on these floating shelves so far, and I thought I'd take a minute, stop, and explain what I've done to this point. So I wanted to set up glass shelves that were modular. I could put glass shelves in, take glass shelves out. That's things like these plates here, where I picked them up at store closings. They used to hold men's dress shirts and things like that. They come in big cubes with plastic clips holding them together. But I thought I could use them as floating shelves inside this wood here to store Legos. So set that down. And so I designed a shelf that could potentially hold the weight here. I just wanted it to be able to sit off the wall a little bit and hold that glass, basically clip it into this groove. So this part here where my thumb is the top, and then underneath here is the support. And I basically used 3 pieces of wood to do this. The back piece is strips of plywood that I cut off. Well, I cut in strips about 2.5 inches wide, because I wasn't entirely sure how wide this was going to end up being. Plus, it was a good thing because now I have some extra material I can cut off and give myself a good clean edge at this bottom side because of how I assembled the rest of this. So that's the plywood down here. This guy here is a 1x4 that I cut into strips that were 3/4 inch wide. And then this guy here is a 2x4 that I planed down to about 1.25 inches by, I think it was 3.5. But anyway, then what I did was I ran it through the table saw and split it on the diagonal. So every 2x4 that I had, I actually got 2 blades out of. So what I did first was I marked, my lines on the back here for where all my screws were going to go in, and I put them a foot apart so that hopefully they would be off from where my studs are in the house where I'm going to screw this ultimately to the wall. And so what I did here was the first piece that went on was this little backing right here. I glued and clamped that in place, and then once it was okay, so I glued and clamped this into place, and then as I went back through here, I drilled countersunk holes so that it wouldn't split the wood, and took that all the way down the board. And so I did that, got that one in place, and then what I did was I actually clamped in. I didn't glue because I was afraid I didn't want to. I was concerned with getting the glue all over and getting it on the glass and having it prematurely seal to the backing before I got everything fixed, because I was going down this board here. I would put this glass in place, clamp the angled board back against it tight, and then run my screws down along that as well and screw that into place. Now, it's created some tight fits, but I don't want it loose either, but it'll slide in like that there into that groove. Some places are a little looser, some places a little tighter. I didn't find a better way to do that. Maybe somebody watching this would, but obviously measuring is probably the best way to go, but I was concerned about my ability to measure. I like to use basically the glass as a jig to give myself the gap, and so that's what I decided to do because I'm not very steady or consistent with my own hands. So anyway, I did all that, and then every piece had these extra bits sticking out there, and I figured out that that's about 2 inches deep. So I set up my table saw, and what I'm doing right now is working on the last few of these. I'm going back through and running this whole thing through and cutting this strip off so that I get a good clean end like that. And then eventually I'll go back, sand everything, and prepare it for painting and mounting and so on. So I'll take stops here every once in a while and try to do a little bit more information on that. So anyway, that's where I'm at right now. These are all going to be floating above a couple of larger pieces that I've put together that'll sit underneath all those shells in the corner. So I'm going to wrap these around the corner as well. Maybe I'll just stick in as I talk here, I'll cut to a picture here of what a 3D model would look like of the end result with all glass loaded and not partially loaded, which I intend to eventually do, is to just partially load the glass here. So some of those pieces that are in this model will cut out and be able to replace for taller kits and things like that, or I'll be able to turn pieces sideways so that I can have a more shallow shelf and have other kits that maybe are taller at one point, but not across the entire length of the shelf. So they can, maybe the wings of something can stand up in front of a short shelf. So anyway, got a couple more of these to cut, and then I'll be back with some more about what I'm doing here. Okay, so finished cutting the last few pieces. I've got 14 shelves now, floating shelves that are 8 foot long. I won't use the full 8 foot length of each one of those shelves. I'm hoping that some of the ones that have to get cut shorter, I'll be able to reuse and maybe actually get a couple extra shelves out of it. How did I decide on 14 shelves? It was the amount of wood I had. Um, so it wasn't anything complicated or planned, but when I did do that 3D model, it turned out that 14 shelves seemed like a good number anyway. So just before I clean up out here, just going to show, did my table saw out here, ran it about 2 inches. I don't really trust this so much, so I actually use a ruler to measure out my distance here between blade and the guide, make sure that it's even, and just ran them through and sliced it up. I made sure the blade was high enough so that if it took off a little bit of the wedge piece, that it cleared that really well. And now it's just time for cleanup on that and then go in and sand. Okay, so I was getting ready here to start sanding, and I pulled out a good piece and has a nice consistent edge on the blade. And I remembered that not every piece was like that, so I pulled these out, look at them side by side, and what you can kind of see here is that this one's kind of chewed. I cut it closer to being back, and it's a sharper edge, where this one's got more of a flat area on it, and it's more consistent all the way down through. So sometimes when I cut these, you know, one piece got thin, one piece got right on. I did the best I could with it, and I'm by no means a professional. So but anyway, so my original thought was to just sand this down and kind of get it as flat and even as I could. But now that I'm looking at it, I think what I'm going to do instead is to try to give a consistent look on the edge of every blade, which is going to be sticking out, pointed towards everyone, even though most cases it'll be hidden. Not every case though, because some places there will be points where there will be no glass, and I'll actually utilize this part here and this part here as a shelf, because this will ultimately sit screwed into the wall like that. So it'll sit on the wall in this configuration, and the wall will be back here. Remember, one hand's for the camera and one hand's for showing things. But anyway, so instead of having this waving all back and forth, I think I'll just go worst case scenario for each board. I'll have to reset the guide and run this through. I'll run them through upside down, and I'll put a piece here to just support this, so I don't accidentally like tip it over as I'm running through the table saw, and get that all set up and take it from there and see what I end up with. Like I said, I'll have to move the guide for each one, because each one's going to be a different depth. I could go worst case scenario on every one, but I think that will end up giving me a different looking edge. And so while the shelves might stick out a little bit more or a little bit less from shelf to shelf, I think what I want is this part of it, this profile that you're looking at straight on, to look more consistent. And then the fact that if you're coming down around the end here, some will be longer this way, some will be shorter. Okay, that'll be the case, but at least from the point of view that you're going to have, which would be straight on like this, that'll be consistent, and or somewhat consistent as I can do anyway. So I'm gonna give that a shot here and get my table saw back out and try running that and see where it gets me. Okay, so I quickly realized that if I'm trying to do worst case here and cut down to the lowest point here, um, the parts that even on the same board that are farther out, I'm not going to get that same profile looking down at it. So I'm going to go back to my original plan of sanding and see if how well I can even it out by hand, and well, as much by hand as I use, and see where that lands me. Now I'm about to pull up a clip here with where I went from the prototype and I adjusted it so that I could put an LED strip in it, and then I was showing what the LED strip looked like once it was inside that. What I found on the prototype was that I tried to cut the groove using a table saw and just the width of the blade to grind that out, and it didn't come out very clean. So what I ended up doing was actually setting up my router table and putting a bit in there, and it did a much better job using the router table and running the boards down that to cut the groove in. It gave me a much cleaner cut, and it was easier to control the depth than trying to do maybe one or two swipes with a table saw. But then here's that clip that where I'm testing out the LED strip in the original prototype that I built. So I think I'm going to do a little test video with the LEDs, see what we got going on here. I have them back there behind the glass, and so it lights up kind of nice on the video here. In person it doesn't look as dramatic, but it does look like it's coming through okay. I'll try some different colors. The red doesn't transfer very well. Blue, of course, because the glass is kind of blue. That's white. So I got about 12 different LED strips that I want to connect together for some accent lighting on my new Lego shelves, and I decided PT Fix would be a good way to do that, to bring each one of those 12 lines in together and tie them back into the power supply. So here I set this up to do a quick test, and so it connects through to one, and I'll find out if the as I wire up the rest, if the rest will work. Okay, so I got the corner emptied out. I'm getting ready to start working on these. I had pulled apart the blade portion of the shelf to install the LED strips and cut them to length, and instead of using connectors at the corners in that, I decided I could keep a lower profile by just soldering little strips of wire in there. So I got that started, and so I got all those on there. I'm going to run some wood glue around the back edge and do one final screw into the main beam going across the back there. Then I'll prop them up onto the wall and then start securing them to the studs, which I've already pre-marked on the wall itself. So I don't think it's coming up very good on the video, but anyway, that's what I'm going to do. And I've even pre-wired the end so they can drag that down and go into a block where I'm going to combine all 12 strips into one line. I'll run them down the wall here, and then I'll have the junction down in here, and I'll run the power cord back over to this outlet here. So get started on that, see how it goes, and hopefully this is going to work out, and then I can do the other set that's going to go around the corner, And then the rest of it, once I get 2 of them going around the corner, the rest should be just single pieces going up this wall here and down back around there. So, time to get started. Alright, so after a few different issues that I ran into with this, I got the first set of shelf brackets up and put in a piece of glass to try that out and see how that works. So I can cycle through different colors and whites. And so this is what I'll have for the shelf. The shelf that I have in there now is actually turned sideways. I can spin that around the other way to get the full length of it pointing out. I had some issues finding the studs. My walls appear to be irregular in some respects, so there was that. There was also the issue of I wanted to bury the screw heads in the back behind where the glass fits in that groove, but trying to drill that out is just not working well, so I'm going straight in through the top support beam into the studs, and I'll clean it up from there. I'll have to go back and wood fill and sand and clean that out when I'm ready to actually finish these shelves and paint them, because I'll do that when I actually paint the entire room. But anyway, I had that, and then I had issues with the connection there in the corner. So originally that was supposed to be wired together, so I only had one set of wires coming out here at the other end, but as it turns out, now I have another one that I have to run along underneath the board. I just couldn't hold it steady enough to maintain the solder connections while I was trying to move the boards themselves and reattach the back piece to the wedge, so on and so forth. So anyway, I had a lot of issues with that, so I ended up soldering the wire on and just making its own connection. So instead of now having 12 sets of wires going to that, I'll have 14 plus the lead going to the power, so that'll be 15. But there are plenty of slots on these PT Fix that I picked up. I picked up some that actually had extra slots, mostly because they were in stock, but because I would have done, PT Fix comes in a bunch of different colors, and I would have liked to have done like a black block, a blue block, a green block, and a red block, but gray was what was in stock, so that's what I went with. And I figured I could just tell which color is which by what color wires are going into it. But anyway, I'll find an enclosure for that then too, so that is not all exposed. But anyway, that's what the first shelf set is all set up, looks like, with power on. Try some of the different colors again, and then you can actually go through and do some sequences. That's a little weird. Anyway, first setup, and 12 more to go. So PT Fixes seems to be working out pretty well to combine these LED strips. I ran the 2 that you see hanging go to the far end there. I'm going to run them up along those boards. I think I mentioned that before, but anyway, so they're feeding through there. I'll attach them later. And now I'm up to the part where I'm doing just this wall, and so these are coming along pretty good. One of the shelves are in, and if we cycle this through the primary colors, they all seem to be working just fine. Everything's hooked up. And so that's where we're at right now. I realized I might have been able to run another one there, but then I looked at the uneven edge that we had coming off the ceiling, and since those beams are actually level, I probably would have run into some problems trying to put a third one across there. So I'm glad I didn't plan on doing that right from the start. So anyway, that's where we're at, and we'll catch up later with the rest of it, hopefully when it's finished. Okay, so one of the things I've been doing here is I'm moving on with the shelves, and I got up to the part where the ceiling is angled, so I have to cut a 40-degree angle down into the board. Well, the problem with the way I need to cut it, it is when I don't have any saws that'll go that far. They only go to about 45 degrees. So what I'm doing is a two-step process where I mark my distance here with the first line and get that cut across there, and then on the back I give it the angle that I actually need, that 40-degree angle. Then I come back with a 45-degree angle off of this point down here, run that back to the top and over here so I have a line to go by, so when the saw blade comes in it gets at 45 degrees. And then I have a jig set up on my disc sander, and once I get that cut, then I take it over to the disc sander where I can get the 40-degree angle, and I sand that down to the line where on my 40 degrees, and that's been working out for me so far. So I've got a few of these done. I'm in the middle of working my way up the shelf, so this will be the third one that I've done with the 40-degree angle, and then I'll have 6 more to do after that. But that's where I'm at right now. I've been putting these back together to do the cut, and then I take them apart to do the LEDs, where I'll set up, solder on the extension wire so that it can run down, and get that, and then I'll lay it in the groove that's cut into these. That is this groove right down in there, and then run the wires out, tape that down so it's adhered down, and then I go back and I reassemble this, because I'll have to take this blade off. This blade has to come off to do that, to set the LEDs. And then what I do is I come back and I'll actually put some wood glue on this then, so I get a bit more secure fix with this bottom blade, because right now only the top support is glued in, this one is not. So I'm done messing around with taking it apart and putting it back together. And cross my fingers, so far I haven't like stripped any of the holes out where I had to drill new holes, but that's where I'm at with that. So that's this part, and then we'll move on from there. Alright, so this is the part that I set up outside, that same board, start doing the cuts and that. But so I have my saw here set up at a 45-degree angle, go down, cut down in on that line there, then I'll sand back to that line using this setup here. I just have to slide the board in, and it gives me the angle that I need right there. So get started with that, but this is what I'm using outside to get that whole setup running. Alright, so now that I have that board cut to length and angled, all that set, I'll take that apart then, but before I do I want to prep the LED strip. So first thing was to lay the strip out on this board and get the length. So I got the length, cut that. I mean, I have only so much to work with there, because you have 3 LEDs per section, and you can only cut on a section. So ideally I'd like to have like one more LED on the end of these strips on the angle, with the angle cuts, but it is what it is. So I think it's gonna look just fine anyway. But anyhow, so what I'm doing is, instead of using regular connectors, I'm just soldering wires onto the end of these to run down to my PT fix blocks. So for the end that I'm soldering onto here, I'm doing just 4 or 5 millimeter strips with this guy here, this wire fox tool, cutting them apart, cutting the wire off with this. Like for this one, I measured it out to 55 inches at my chart for, as I go up each shelf, I know what length I have to cut the extension wire to and all that. So for this end here, 4 to 5 inches, then this is my PT fix end. I'm doing about 10-inch strips, so I have plenty of wire to work with. Normally, what you would do with these is actually strip them to length for ferrules and ferrule the end of the wires, crimp them on there. But I didn't have ferrules and I wanted to get started on this, so I decided I was just going to pre-tin the wires to give them a little bit more rigidity. So I'm going to tin these and tin these open wires so that they solder on to the LED strip a little bit easier. It's nice once I started getting the hang of it, because I'm not a guy that does a lot of soldering. It's just a quick touch once the soldering iron is up to temperature and they're on. It doesn't take long. You don't have to hold it there forever. It's just quick touch and you're off. You move on to the next wire. So I'm going to melt a little bit of solder tin on the end of these wires and go from there. Alright, so I was saying how easy it was to solder these, and I actually had a little bit of trouble with the blue wire on this last set, and so that is right down here. So I had a little bit of trouble with it. I had to add some solder and redo it, but I got it on there. But instead of getting it all fixed up and attached right away, I decided to test it first. I've been doing that a lot with these, but since I was taking a break here with this one, I wanted to stop in because these PT fix blocks have been really helpful in this, because the PT mechanism is just in and out. It's a secure fit for the wire. It holds it in there nice and tight. I don't have to worry about it coming out, but at the same time, push the actuator and the wires come in and out really easy. So as I take these strips in and out for testing, before I finally fix them into the boards, this PT fix mechanism has been, well, the PT mechanism push-in technology has just been real help in this, where I don't have to solder, resolder, or crimp and screw up wires and what have you. They just the spring mechanism in the PT is just really helpful. So I just wanted to stop because I wanted to pull this out and test. I thought it'd be a good time to mention that. So alright, so I brought the next shelf up. I've got board back attached on, the LEDs are installed, and getting ready to place it in the position here. To help me get the shelves evenly spaced, I grabbed these 3-inch blocks that I cut so that I could space them out even. And so I'll line that up there. I got some marks for studs where I can find them. Being the house that this is with the angle, the studs are a bit irregular, but I have a decent stud finder. So anyway, that's all set up, that's ready to go, and I mentioned it before, I'm just going straight through the upper support to screw that into the wall, and then I'll do that wherever I can find a stud. And I got these 3-inch screws. Make sure that they're not going anywhere. And so that's where I'm at. I'll keep going with that all the way up the wall here as far as I can go. And now for one more test before I move on to the next shelf. Looks like it's working. So another thing about these boards was that I went through and I put the screws in at 1 foot marks all the way down, not knowing exactly where I was going to cut each one off. And I suppose I could have went and figured all that out, but I just figured when I got to a point like this where this was going to be the waste board, I could take these screws out and move them up to this position here where the wood's going to be there, and I can run them in and behind the cut. So that's all I did, was I just moving that around. This one I actually had a screwed up screw, and I didn't even bother putting it back in on that end because I knew I was cutting that off, and so those are the ones holding the scrap together. But yeah, so I just moved them down a little bit so that they would hold the very end of the board and keep that stable. So that was just another little thing that came up as I was going through and doing these. And so that's everything there. Kits are in place, the shelves are in, and it's working well for me. And now I've suddenly realized that I need more shelves to hold more kits, because I had a backlog of kits going, and I've got a few collector series kits that are going to take up some space. Let's either break down kits and put them away, or build new shelves. And you know what? I'm just going to build some new shelves.